My parents said, "Your sister deserves luxury." So they took the house I spent a decade saving for, but they didn't expect I'd come back with a lawyer and burn it all to the ground, piece by piece. I'm Maris Landon. I'm 42, a night shift nurse at Camellia Ridge Medical Center, and I live alone in a rented one-bedroom that smells faintly of old carpet and lemon cleaner. It's not glamorous, but it's quiet. Most days, I just try to keep my head down, do my job, and be the kind of daughter people are proud to mention at dinner parties. The good one. The understanding one. In my family, that role's always belonged to me. My sister Alora, well, she's the opposite. Big personality, bigger entrances. She runs a trendy little fashion boutique in Newark with 1 million followers, bold lipstick, and a knack for getting exactly what she wants without ever seeming to ask. I can't remember the last time someone asked me how I felt. I remember the way the leaves clung to my windshield that day, like they were trying to hold on for dear life, same as I was. The air hadn't quite turned to winter, but it was cold enough to make me zip my coat all the way up to my chin as I walked into the bank. I just transferred the last of my savings, 10 years of night shifts, skipped vacations, secondhand clothes, and peanut butter sandwiches. Every dime had gone toward a small lake house in Maple Bridge I'd dreamed of for years. Pale blue shutters, a porch swing, and that stillness you only find near water. It wasn't big, but it felt like peace. Like mine. The plan had been simple. My credit wasn't perfect, but Mom, retired bookkeeper, self-proclaimed expert, had a solution. "Let's put our names on the paperwork, just for the mortgage," she said. "You'll get a better rate. You'll still be making all the payments." I hesitated. Of course I did. But when you've spent your whole life trusting someone, it's hard to imagine they'd ever weaponize that trust. That Saturday, we had dinner at Mom and Dad's house like we always do when Alora's in town. I brought over a butternut squash casserole and a bottle of cheap wine. Alora floated in 20 minutes late with a new haircut and a fiancé in tow, tall, handsome, probably allergic to casseroles. Everyone fussed over her ring and asked about the wedding, which was going to be small and elegant and completely unforgettable, according to Alora. I sat quietly, smiling when I was supposed to, passing plates and topping off drinks. I was used to this rhythm, the way my presence filled in the background of their lives like wallpaper. Comfortable, expected, invisible. But then, just after dessert, while Mom was rinsing plates and I was wiping down the counter, I heard Alora's voice float in from the living room. She was on the phone, giddy, pacing with one bare foot tucked behind the other, like she was in a photo shoot. "I can't believe I'm finally moving into the lake house. It's gonna be perfect for the engagement shoot." I froze. The dish towel dropped from my hand like it had been cut loose. The lake house? My lake house? My chest tightened, and I walked into the room. Alora hung up when she saw me, her smile faltering just slightly. I looked at Mom. She dried her hands on a floral dish towel and met my gaze like she'd been rehearsing this moment. "Alora needs a fresh start," she said softly. "A real home. You're doing fine, Maris. You've always been so steady. She deserves something beautiful right now." I didn't say a word. I didn't trust my mouth to form anything that wouldn't explode into ash and regret. My legs carried me to the door, then to my car, like they had a mind of their own. Sitting behind the wheel, I could feel everything but also nothing. A tight burn behind my eyes. Hands clenched around the steering wheel. My mother's voice echoed in my head, soft but firm, the way she used to say it when I let Alora have the last cookie, or the front seat, or the bigger bedroom. "You're the one who understands, Maris. You've always been the one who keeps the peace." I looked up through the windshield and there it was. The house. Lit up from within, glowing like a secret being whispered to someone else. That was the night I learned you can love a place with your whole heart and still never set foot inside. The hospital always smelled like bleach and metal. I'd worked at Camellia Ridge long enough to stop noticing most of it, but that night, the smell hit different. Maybe because I was already unraveling, and everything sharp felt sharper. The nurse's station was unusually quiet, and my footsteps echoed too loudly as I walked toward the break room, clutching my coffee like it could hold me together. I couldn't stop thinking about what Alora had said. About the house. The way she smiled when she said it, like it was hers all along. Like my years of scrimping and dreaming had been nothing but background noise in her personal movie. And my mother's voice, so calm, so certain, kept circling my head. You're doing fine, Maris. You've always been steady. Steady. That was the word. It sounded like a compliment, but it wasn't. Not really. It was code for quiet, for easy to overlook, for invisible. I finished my shift running on muscle memory and caffeine. No one noticed I wasn't quite there. That's the thing about being the dependable one. People don't look twice. They assume you're fine until you collapse. After work, I didn't go straight home. I walked a few blocks down to Lemon and Thistle, a small cafe tucked between a used bookstore and a dry cleaner. The chairs were mismatched, the tables wobbly, but they made the best honey oat muffins in town. June used to meet me there sometimes after our shifts. She'd retired 6 months ago, but something in me needed her that morning. I texted, and by some miracle, she was already sitting by the window when I arrived. You look like hell, she said, not unkindly. I smiled weakly. You always knew how to charm me. She pushed a mug across the table. Chamomile, not coffee. She remembered. Tell me what happened. I hesitated. Then the words tumbled out. About the house, the lie, Alora's phone call, my mother's shrug. June listened without interrupting, her face still as stone. When I was done, she leaned back and looked at me the way only someone who's lived through it can. Maris, she said gently, how many years have you let people take what was yours because it felt easier than fighting for it? I stared at her. I didn't answer, because the answer was all my life. She nodded slowly. I did that too. For 23 years. Gave up everything just to keep things smooth. A husband, a home. Even my own name, if I'm being honest. And you know what I got in return? She smiled, sad and soft. Nothing that lasted. Her words landed like pebbles in a pond, quiet but impossible to ignore. I wrapped my hands around the warm mug, trying to ground myself. I just thought they wouldn't do that. I whispered. Not like this. June didn't flinch. People like that count on your silence, on your steadiness. They think you won't push back because you never have. After we said our goodbyes, I went home and sat on the floor of my apartment, back against the wall. I opened my laptop and logged into the county's property record site. Just a routine check, I told myself. Just to make sure it was still pending. It took less than 2 minutes. Current registered owner, Alora Landon. No co-owner. No mention of my name. The screen blurred. I blinked hard. I refreshed the page. Same result. At first, I couldn't breathe. My mind raced through every possible explanation. Maybe it was a clerical error. Maybe the paperwork hadn't gone through. But I knew. Deep down, I knew. They'd taken me off the title. My hands shook as I closed the laptop. I sat there a long time, not moving. Just breathing. Just trying to piece myself together before I shattered completely. It wasn't just about the house. It was what the house represented. All those years of biting my tongue, of stepping aside, of being the understanding daughter. I had sacrificed real things, sleep, health, relationships, to finally have something of my own. And they gave it away like it was a gift basket at a bridal shower. Alora had always been the center. Of attention. Of every decision. Of every excuse. I was the orbit, necessary, constant, but never the focus. That night, lying in bed, I didn't cry. Not yet. I stared at the ceiling and whispered to the dark, I think they finally broke something I can't put back. And the scariest part wasn't the betrayal. It was that I wasn't sure if I could ever be steady again. I printed the document on the old laser printer at work. The lines were faded, but the bold header glared at me like a slap. Change of ownership. Maplebridge Lake property. I tucked the paper into my bag, fingers shaking as I folded it once, then again, like it might shrink down small enough to disappear if I just willed it hard enough. I didn't call ahead. I didn't even know if I was going to speak. But my car somehow found its way back to my parents' house, that familiar pale yellow ranch with the same wind chime that had hung on the porch since I was a teenager. It clinked softly as I walked up the steps, like it was trying to warn me. Mom answered the door, wearing her gardening apron and those soft house slippers she never threw away. Her face brightened like it always did when she saw me, until she saw my expression. "Can we talk?" I asked, already stepping inside. The kitchen still smelled like rosemary and lemon cleaner. That used to feel like home. Now it smelled like something I no longer belonged to. I pulled out the paper and laid it flat on the kitchen table. She didn't sit, just looked down at it, eyes calm. "This says Elora owns the house," I said. "No mention of me. Nothing." Mom blinked slowly, then pulled out a chair. "You signed the authorization, Maris." "What authorization?" "The one I gave you last week, remember? I told you it was some extra paperwork the bank needed. You signed it." I stared at her. The week before, I'd stopped by after a double shift. I barely remembered what I ate, let alone what I'd signed. She'd handed me a stapled packet and said it was just a formality. I hadn't even read it. I was too tired, too trusting. I sat down hard. My knees didn't want to hold me anymore. "You tricked me," I whispered. She frowned. "No. I helped you. This is better for everyone. Elora needs stability right now. She's building a family. You don't have children, Maris. You're always working. You've said yourself that you don't know if this was the right time." "I never said that," I snapped, louder than I'd meant to. "I said I was nervous." "That's not the same." She sighed like I was being unreasonable, like I'd just taken the last cookie off the plate without asking. "I thought you'd understand. You always do. I didn't think you'd be this upset." Those words hit harder than anything else. Not because they were cruel, but because they were honest. She hadn't thought I'd fight back. She hadn't even considered that I might feel betrayed. I leaned forward, voice trembling now. "You used me. You waited until I was exhausted and asked me to sign something you knew I wouldn't question. And now you're acting like I'm the one being difficult." Elora walked in just then, holding a coffee mug like she'd wandered into the wrong scene. She looked between us, then at the document. "What's going on?" I turned to her. "Did you know?" Her eyes widened. "Know what?" "That the house is in your name." She opened her mouth, then closed it. Her gaze dropped to the floor. I thought it was a group decision. I didn't know Mom had you sign anything." "That's convenient," I muttered. "Maris, please." Her voice was small, the way it had been when we were kids and she'd broken something, but knew I'd take the blame. I stood up, the chair scraping the tile. My heart pounded, not with rage, but with something deeper. Sadness. Disbelief. A kind of cold clarity I hadn't felt before. "I spent 10 years building a life I could believe in," I said, looking between them. "And you both dismantled it in one afternoon, without blinking." Mom didn't move. Elora didn't speak. I walked out without another word. The screen door creaked behind me like it was tired of staying upright. In the car, I didn't cry. Not yet. The betrayal hadn't settled into grief yet. It was still raw, still echoing like a dropped pan on a tile floor. I gripped the steering wheel, eyes locked on the driveway, then slowly backed out. It wasn't the loss of the house that broke me. It was the realization that the people who raised me had counted on my silence more than they'd ever counted on my voice. I didn't even remember how I ended up in the hospital parking lot. My hands were on the steering wheel, my forehead against it, and the late-night air creeping in through the cracked window. The lights from the emergency entrance blinked in my rearview mirror, soft and steady, like a heartbeat. Familiar. Comforting in a strange way. That's when I saw her, June. She was getting out of her old Toyota, still wearing the same oversized cardigan I'd seen her attire in. I hadn't even called her. I guess some people just know when to show up. She knocked gently on the passenger window and waited. I unlocked the door without saying anything. "You hungry?" she asked. I shook my head. "Come on. I've got tea. Real tea. Not the stuff from the vending machine." I followed her home, too tired to argue. Her house smelled like cinnamon and old paperbacks, and the guest room was already made up. She didn't ask questions, didn't press. She just handed me a cup of something warm and sat down across from me at the kitchen table. We didn't talk for a while. Just sipped in silence, the kind that wraps around you like a worn quilt. Then, when the words finally came, they spilled out like they'd been waiting for years. "I don't know who I'm more mad at," I said, staring into the steam. "Them for doing it. Or me, for letting it be this easy." June tilted her head. "Letting what be easy? Taking from me? Assuming I'd just take it, smile, and nod and move on." She set her mug down. "Maris, being the nice one doesn't mean being the doormat." I laughed, bitter. "Doesn't it? Because that's what I've been. For 42 years. She leaned in slightly. "Being kind isn't the same as being small. And anger doesn't make you wrong. It means something mattered." I didn't respond. My throat was too tight. Instead, I reached for my phone and saw 3 missed calls, 2 from Alora, 1 from Mom. A string of unread texts. I flipped the phone face down and pushed it away. "I don't want to talk to them," I whispered. "Then don't," June said simply. "But if I don't, that's me giving up, right? That's me walking away from my family." She met my eyes. "No, that's you choosing not to bleed for people who don't notice your cut." The words hit hard. Not because they were new, but because they were true. And I'd never let myself say them out loud. I stayed in June's guest room that night. The sheets were soft, the window cracked open just enough to let in the night breeze. I didn't set an alarm. I didn't plan anything. I just slept. A deep, uninterrupted sleep that felt more like healing than rest. The next morning, I didn't reach for my phone. I made scrambled eggs, toast, and coffee with actual cream. I sat at the table and ate slowly, like it was something I deserved. And afterward, I pulled out a journal June kept stacked on the bookshelf, blank pages, waiting. I started writing, not to make sense of things, but to finally say the things I'd always swallowed. I wrote about the time I gave Alora my birthday money so she could buy a dress for prom. I wrote about the Christmas I spent alone at the hospital so my parents could visit her in Miami. I wrote about the dozens of times I'd been told, "You're so easygoing, Maris. You don't need much." And then I wrote a question. What if they believed that because I never asked for more? That's what scared me the most, that I had trained them to believe my needs didn't exist. That in trying to be good, I'd made myself invisible. That night, I stood by the window, watching the wind ripple through June's backyard. There was peace in that stillness, but also something deeper, resolve. Maybe being the quiet one wasn't kindness. Maybe it was fear. And I was done being afraid. The guest room at June's was small but warm, like everything else in her house. She'd placed a lavender-scented candle on the nightstand, cleared off the dresser except for a tiny porcelain dish that held a few bobby pins and a safety pin. A small basket sat neatly on the bed when I arrived. Fresh towels, travel-sized lotion, and a handwritten note that said, "You're not a guest. You're home." I didn't know how long I'd be staying, and she never asked. She just gave me a spare key and told me where the extra blankets were, like this kind of kindness was as natural to her as breathing. That afternoon, after too many cups of lukewarm tea and a long walk around the block where I barely noticed the trees changing color, I sat cross-legged on the carpet in that room. The late sunlight hit the floor in a soft slant, the kind that makes you feel both safe and strangely exposed. I opened my laptop and clicked into the folder labeled House Docs. The name alone made my stomach twist. I had kept everything: emails, scanned contracts, receipts. Most of it I hadn't looked at since the purchase process began, trusting that what had been done was fair and above board. Back then, I'd believed that the worst anyone in my family could do was misunderstand me, not deceive me. I didn't know exactly what I was hoping to find. Maybe a missed email that explained everything. Maybe something that would tell me I'd blown this all out of proportion. What I found instead was a PDF attached to a 4-month-old email from an address I didn't recognize. No subject line. No message body. Just a file. I hesitated a moment before clicking, like some part of me already knew what was coming. The document loaded slowly, just lines of dry legal language and forms I vaguely remembered seeing before. But then my eyes locked on the bottom of one particular page. There it was. My name. My signature. Or something that looked like it. Authorization of ownership transfer. I blinked. Scrolled back. Then zoomed in on the signature box. Something wasn't right. The loops in the M were too tight, the way they used to be when I first started signing legal forms in my 20s. The L of Landon tilted at a low angle I hadn't used in years. I stared at it, trying to place why it felt so off. And then it hit me. That signature wasn't new. It was old. A duplicate. I opened another folder, an old bank document I'd saved years ago. Pulled it up. Lined it side by side. Identical. Not just similar, identical down to the pixel. Same slant, same smudged loop in the S. Someone had taken an old scanned copy and digitally pasted it into this new document. My chest tightened. I whispered aloud, like saying it would make it less terrifying. Wait, that's not even my signature. That's from a bank form I signed 3 years ago. My fingers went numb. I closed the laptop and sat there frozen, the soft carpet pressing into my legs. This wasn't just about family favoritism anymore. This wasn't just Alora getting what she wanted again. This was forgery. This was fraud. I called out softly, "June?" She stepped into the room with that careful gentleness she always carried. I showed her the laptop, my voice shaky, as I explained everything I'd just realized. She didn't gasp or cry out. She just nodded slowly and said, "You need to talk to someone. I know a man, David Claremont. He's an old family lawyer. Sharp as ever. Helped me during my divorce when I didn't even know which way was up. He doesn't care about drama. He cares about what's right." 2 days later, I sat in David's home office. It was part sunroom, part time capsule. Wooden shelves groaned under the weight of law books. The blinds were half drawn, and somewhere in the corner, a record played low jazz on vinyl. David looked to be in his 70s, wiry with a full head of white hair and a voice that sounded like someone had sandpapered velvet. I handed him a manila envelope stuffed with printed documents. He read silently, flipping pages with slow precision. When he finished, he removed his glasses and looked up. "This," he said, tapping one page with his knuckle, "is a problem." I held my breath. It's more than a family dispute. This is potentially criminal. Forgery. Misrepresentation. If you're willing to pursue it, we can build a case. My mouth went dry. So, I'd be suing my own family? David didn't answer right away. He studied me for a moment before replying. "You'd be suing for the truth. What they did isn't just betrayal, it's about control. And if they did this thinking you'd never notice, it means they assumed you had no voice." The weight of those words sat heavy in my chest. I left with a folder of paperwork and a different kind of burden, one that didn't feel like grief or confusion but clarity. The air outside felt different. The wind a little sharper, the sun a little lower. I didn't know what came next. Maybe court, maybe backlash, maybe silence. But I knew one thing. I wasn't just the one who got hurt anymore. I was the one holding the truth. And I was finally ready to speak it. David's office smelled like old wood, lemon oil, and something faintly musty, like the pages of a book that hadn't been opened in years. The afternoon light came in through the blinds in faded gold, striping the floor like a barcode on silence. He sat behind his oak desk, calm and unreadable, the file I'd brought resting squarely between us. Copies of every email, every altered signature, every proof of what had been done. "You have every legal right to pursue this," he said, voice firm but quiet. "But be ready. Families don't break cleanly." I nodded slowly but didn't speak right away. My hands were folded in my lap, cold despite the late-day sun pouring through the windows. The weight of it all sat like a brick on my chest. I kept thinking about what it meant, taking legal action against my own mother, my sister, the people who'd shared every dinner table, every Christmas, every birthday song. I'd been raised to believe loyalty mattered more than fairness, that being the good daughter meant being forgiving, flexible. Small. Good daughters didn't file lawsuits. They swallowed pain like medicine. They made banana bread after arguments and showed up early to set the table. They didn't call lawyers. But maybe I didn't want to be the good daughter anymore. Not if it meant disappearing. I thanked David, told him I'd be in touch soon, and left with the folder still under my arm. I didn't go home. Not to June's, not anywhere that looked familiar. I went straight to Lemon and Thistle. That little cafe had become something like a lifeline, neutral ground where nothing expected anything of me. It was quiet that evening. The last of the regulars were chatting softly at the back, and the barista gave me a nod of recognition as I walked in. I took my usual seat by the window and ordered chamomile tea without really tasting the words coming out of my mouth. The light outside was dimming. Fall crept into the corners of the air. It was the kind of stillness that made you think about things too much. There was a shelf near the counter with blank journals for sale, and I grabbed one. A simple navy cover, no lines, just empty space. I opened to the first page, clicked the pen in my hand, and began to write. Not to figure anything out. Just to release it. The truth of it. My truth. Dear Mom, you always said I was the strong one, the selfless one. And maybe that was true. But what you called strength was often silence. What you called selflessness was me stepping aside, again and again, while you handed pieces of my life to someone else. You told me Elora needed the house more. You told me I'd understand. That I didn't need much. But you never asked what I needed. You assumed I would bend like I always had. You counted on it. You thought my quiet meant agreement. You thought my patience meant approval. But what it really meant was exhaustion. I was tired, Mom. Tired of being the one who held everyone else's feelings, while mine were always too much, too inconvenient, or just irrelevant. You didn't ask. You decided. And then you told me to be grateful. You once said, family sticks together. But you only meant it when I was the one doing all the sticking. You crossed a line. And this time, I'm not coming back over it.
Maris.
When I finished, my hand ached from gripping the pen too tightly. I sat there for a moment, staring at the words until the ink seemed to blur. I didn't cry. I didn't need to. This wasn't grief anymore. This was truth, written plainly, finally. I folded the letter neatly and slid it into the back of the journal. I wasn't going to send it. She'd never read it. That wasn't the point. The point was that I had finally said the things that needed saying, even if it was only to myself. When I stepped outside, the streetlights were just flickering on, and the chill in the air wrapped around me like a coat I hadn't realized I needed. I zipped up my jacket and walked slowly toward my car. I wasn't stalling. I wasn't unsure. I was taking a moment to realize that something inside me had shifted permanently. The next morning, I went back to David's office. The same light, the same wood-paneled calm, but this time I walked with purpose. He looked up from a stack of documents, his eyes scanning mine before he said a word. I've thought about everything, I told him, and I know what this might cost. He set his pen down. Are you sure? I took a breath, deep and steady. Then I reached into my bag, pulled out the folder, and placed it on the desk between us. I'm not doing this to hurt anyone, I said, my voice steady. But I finally realized that protecting their comfort shouldn't mean losing myself. David didn't smile, but he gave the smallest of nods. There was respect in it. And maybe a little relief. Then let's file it, he said. Elora called the morning after the filing. I was standing at the kitchen sink, the kettle just starting to hiss on the stove, when her name lit up my phone screen for the third time in 10 minutes. The first two I let ring out. I wasn't ready. But something in me, maybe curiosity, maybe muscle memory, told me to pick up this time. Maybe I needed to hear what she would say now that silence wasn't the only language I spoke. She didn't even say hello. Please don't do this, she said, her voice already on the edge of breaking. Please, Maris. You know how this will look. You know what it'll do to Mom. I leaned back against the counter, watching the steam from the kettle curl against the window. The maple tree in June's backyard had started shedding early this year. Yellow leaves danced across the lawn, careless and free. Elora, I said quietly, I'm not doing this to hurt anyone. You're taking it to court, she snapped, her voice rising with disbelief. You've turned it into a public mess. What happened to keeping this in the family? I spent most of my life keeping things in the family, I replied, slow and measured. swallowing my hurt so you wouldn't have to feel yours. But peace built on a lie isn't peace, Elora. It's pressure. And it was crushing me. There was silence on her end, then a shaky breath. She didn't mean to. She knew exactly what she was doing. My voice was calm, too calm. She forged a signature. She transferred something I'd worked a decade for. That wasn't the misunderstanding. That was a choice. She just thought I wouldn't fight back. Elora didn't respond. She hung up. 3 days later, I got the call from Mom. Her voice was thin, oddly formal. "We'd like to have a family conversation," she said, just to clear the air. She didn't say sorry. She didn't say she understood. Just a conversation. At the lake house. The lake house. The one I used to dream about when my shifts ended at 3 a.m., when I needed a quiet future to keep going. The one with the porch swing I picked out 5 years ago on a whim. The blue shutters I imagined painting myself every fall. My almost home. I almost said no. But something in me knew I had to go. Not for them. Not to negotiate or make peace, but to look them in the eye and not flinch. To take back the part of myself that kept asking to be seen. They were already there when I arrived. Mom in the armchair, arms crossed like she was bracing for a storm. Dad next to her, silent, rigid. Elora sat on the couch with her legs tucked under her, hands twisted tight in her lap, like she was praying for a way out. I didn't say hello. I walked in, placed a manila folder on the coffee table, and sat in the remaining chair. "I brought copies of the documents," I said, voice steady, "in case anyone still has doubts." "Maris," Mom's voice cracked slightly, "you really want to drag your own family through court?" I didn't respond right away. Instead, I let my eyes scan the room. The same soft beige walls. The framed pictures, vacations, birthdays, smiling faces frozen in time. Me and Elora in matching dresses, the way Mom always liked. Everyone smiling. Everyone pretending. "You already dragged me through it," I said finally. "Only you did it with pens and paper and a lot of assumptions. You're making this into something it's not." "No, Mom," I said. "You are. You took something that didn't belong to you. You rewrote the story and hoped I wouldn't notice. Now you're upset I'm not staying quiet." She leaned forward, her face tight with frustration and something else. Maybe fear. Maybe regret. "You're tearing this family apart," she said, slipping into Vietnamese like she always did when she wanted to cut deeper. "How can you see your own mother?" I held her gaze. I didn't flinch. "You're not the victim here. You chose to deceive me. You thought I'd stay silent like always. And you were right, until now." No one moved. The silence that followed was louder than any shouting match could have been. I reached into the folder and pulled out the printed evidence. Overlays of the forged signature, email timestamps, document comparisons. I laid them out piece by piece, like a map back to the truth. "I'm not here to argue," I said. "I'm not here to negotiate. I'm here to say this ends now. I'm not asking for anyone's permission. I'm not begging to be heard. I am reclaiming what's mine legally, emotionally, and in every other way that matters." Elora blinked away tears, but said nothing. Dad kept staring at the floor, expression unreadable. Mom opened her mouth like she wanted to say something else, something to pull me back. But I didn't stay to hear it. I stood up, walked to the door. No more waiting for them to understand. No more bending myself in half so they could feel whole. I didn't apologize. I didn't explain. And I walked away without asking for anyone's blessing. I didn't need it anymore. It was 3 weeks to the day after I'd walked out of the lake house when the phone rang. I was folding laundry in the quiet rhythm I'd grown to love, socks paired, shirts smoothed one by one. The number on the screen wasn't saved, but I didn't need caller ID to know. I just stood there and watched it ring until the screen went dark. The voicemail came through a few minutes later. I listened with the speaker on, the sound echoing off the tile in June's kitchen as I rinsed a bowl of blueberries I'd probably forget to eat. "Hi, sweetheart. It's Mom." Her voice sounded smaller than I remembered, like it had curled into itself. "Elora and Darren are moving to Zurich. He got some opportunity with his firm. They won't need the house anymore. If you still want it, we can talk. I'll call the attorney and get the papers redone. She ended the message like she was asking if I wanted to come over for coffee. Just casual, just normal, like nothing had ever happened. I stood there with the water still running, the blueberries soaking, my hands motionless in the stream. Outside the window, the trees were shedding fast, yellow and rust-colored leaves fluttering onto the patio like confetti. The sound of a distant lawnmower hummed in and out, interrupted only by the rustle of branches. All of it so ordinary. And yet everything had changed. I didn't call her back that day. Or the day after. When I finally did, I was standing outside the condo complex I'd been looking at for weeks. It was a modest building, nothing fancy, but it had a little path that wound through birch trees and a porch wide enough for a rocking chair. I could picture mornings there. I could picture breathing. She answered on the first ring. "Mom," I said, my voice even quiet. "I got your message." A beat of silence. "I meant what I said," she told me. "If you want the house back, we'll sign it over. It should have been yours. I see that now." I swallowed hard. Not from emotion, but from the ache of too many years trying to hear those words, and now realizing they didn't land like I thought they would. "No," I said gently. "It was never really mine. Not when I had to fight that hard just to be considered." She started to speak again, maybe to explain, maybe to offer the kind of apology that only comes after someone's been caught. But I didn't let her. "I'm not angry anymore," I said. "But I'm also not going back to pretending nothing happened." There was nothing else left to say. I thanked her for the call, then ended it. Afterward, I sat in the silence of June's kitchen and thought about how long I'd mistaken obedience for love. How many birthdays, how many sure I understand, how many first moments I'd stacked like bricks between me and the life I actually wanted. The next morning, I called David. "I want to withdraw the suit," I told him. He didn't ask why. He just said, "Are you sure?" "I am," I said. "Not because they earned peace, but because I already have mine." It felt strange, letting go. Not because it felt like giving up, but because it felt like setting something down I'd been carrying long after I needed to. I used a portion of my savings, the same money I'd planned for the lake house, to put a down payment on a small condo 10 minutes from the water. It wasn't as grand, didn't have the swing or the view, but it was mine. Completely, indisputably mine. My name alone was on the deed. For once, no co-signers, no helpful hands. Just mine. On move-in day, June showed up before I'd even unpacked the kitchen. She brought a warm apple pie wrapped in a dish towel and a bunch of lavender tied together with twine. She placed both gently on the counter, gave the place a slow once-over, and smiled. "So," she said, resting her hands on her hips, "how does it feel to have your own place? Really your own?" I looked around. Sunlight spilled in through the sliding glass doors, touching the floor just where I'd planned to set my reading chair. "It feels," I said slowly, "like I finally came home. To myself." That night, after the last box was broken down and the house smelled faintly of cinnamon and lavender, I sat by the window with a cup of tea. The journal I'd carried since the day I walked into Lemon and Thistle was resting in my lap. I flipped past the letter I never sent, past the pages of pain and clarity. And then, on a fresh sheet, I wrote slowly and deliberately. I am not the quiet one anymore. I am the woman who speaks and stands, and I believed it. Before we end this story, I just want to say, if you've ever been the one who stayed quiet to keep the peace, if you've ever felt like speaking up would mean losing the people you love, I hope Maris's story reminded you that your voice matters. Sometimes the hardest thing isn't standing up to others, it's standing up for yourself. And maybe, just maybe, choosing yourself isn't the end of love. It's the beginning of a different kind. One built on truth, not silence. Have you ever been in that place, caught between being good and being whole? If this story touched something in you, I hope you'll stay with me for the next one. There's always more to uncover in the quiet lives we rarely hear out loud.